Hello, everyone. I am Harry S. Truman. Today, I want to take you through my life, from a boy growing up in a small town in Missouri to the moment I became President of the United States. My story is both my own and a part of the history of a nation that was rapidly changing. Before I begin, let us step back to the late 19th century in America. At that time, the Industrial Revolution was transforming our daily lives. Railroads connected cities and towns, and the telegraph made information travel almost instantly. But for a boy like me, growing up in Lamar, Missouri, life still followed a quiet, steady rhythm. We relied on our own hands, honesty, and the trust of our community. I was born on May 8, 1884. My father was a farmer, and my mother took care of our home. We were not wealthy, but my parents taught me the most valuable lessons: responsibility, hard work, honesty, and caring for others. I had a brother, and together we ran through the countryside, worked in the fields, and fished along the river. As a child, the world seemed vast, and my family was just a small part of it. But it was within this small world that I learned how to face life's challenges. The streets of our town were narrow and quiet, lined with wooden houses and small shops. In the evenings, neighbors would gather to share stories and exchange news. When someone had good fortune, everyone celebrated. When someone struggled, everyone offered help. Living in this close-knit community taught me that the true essence of leadership is not power, but responsibility. The care of the people around you. My childhood was not without hardships. Our limited resources meant I had to help with farm work and odd jobs alongside my studies. On cold winter mornings, I carried buckets of water to feed the livestock. On hot summer days, my brother and I worked in the fields, cutting grass and planting crops. These simple, everyday tasks built my patience and resilience, teaching me that true achievement comes from hard work, not luck or privilege. Yet my childhood was also filled with dreams. I would often look up at the stars, wondering how vast the world was beyond our small town. At the time, I could not imagine becoming president, nor could I foresee that decades later, the world would be plunged into war and that I would stand at a crossroads in history, making decisions that would affect millions. But these early experiences in Lamar laid a strong foundation. No matter what challenges I would face, I had learned to stay grounded, think clearly, and hold fast to my principles. Today, I hope that through my story, you will not only learn about the path my life took, but also get a sense of what life in America was like during that time, its hardships, its warmth, its challenges, and the opportunities it offered. I will begin with my childhood, taking you through the streets of Lamar, the family table, and the world that shaped my character and values. Over the next several hours, I will share with you my growth, my love, my family, my military service, my political career, and the major decisions that placed me at the center of history. I hope my story conveys that no matter the circumstances, maintaining your convictions, taking responsibility, and caring for others are the pathways to a meaningful life. So, let us begin in Lamar, in 1884, and step into the world that shaped me. I was born on May 8, 1884, in the quiet town of Lamar, Missouri. My earliest memories are painted in earthy tones: the brown dirt roads, the wooden fences swaying in the wind, and the vast fields stretching far beyond our farm. My father, John Truman, was a man of few words but immense integrity, a farmer who devoted himself tirelessly to providing for our family. My mother, Martha, ran the household with quiet determination, teaching my brother and me the values that would guide us through life: honesty, diligence, respect for others, and responsibility. Lamar was small, perhaps only a few hundred residents, but it was a community tightly knit by necessity and trust. Every neighbor knew your family, your struggles, and your triumphs. I remember watching the way people came together, how a neighbor would drop work to help if a barn caught fire, or bring a meal to a family struck by illness. Through these simple yet profound acts, I learned early that life is not lived alone, and that true leadership is measured by how we care for those around us. My childhood was largely spent outdoors. My brother and I wandered the fields and forests, sometimes following the tracks of deer, sometimes fishing in the river, sometimes simply inventing games with sticks, stones, and our imaginations. These hours in the wild were lessons in patience and observation. Nature was both a teacher and a playground, revealing the rhythms of life, the importance of persistence, and the subtle lessons of cause and effect. A summer storm taught caution, the planting season taught patience, a newborn calf taught tenderness and care. School was a central part of my youth, though it could be a challenging one. Our schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure, drafty in winter, sweltering in summer, with long benches and a single blackboard. We learned reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and basic moral lessons. Teachers demanded discipline, yet they encouraged curiosity. I wasn't always the fastest learner, but I valued understanding over memorization. I wanted to know the why behind things, not just the how. It was in that schoolhouse, sitting among friends, sharing both struggles and laughter, that I began to grasp the importance of diligence, responsibility, and camaraderie. Life at home demanded labor as much as learning. I helped with farm chores, feeding the chickens, milking cows, tending to the garden, chopping wood, hauling water. Summers were long, hot, and filled with the earthy smell of hay and soil. Winters were harsh, often silent except for the crackle of the hearth fire. I learned to rise before dawn, to toil with determination, and to find satisfaction in a day's work, no matter how humble. These tasks, repetitive though they may have seemed, shaped my character and instilled a deep respect for honest effort. Yet there was joy in all of it. I remember summers picking wild berries with my mother, listening to her hum as she worked, or sitting with my father while he repaired tools, watching his hands move with precision and care. Evenings were for storytelling. My brother and I would sit by the fire, sharing tales, imagining distant lands, and dreaming of adventures. These small moments nurtured my imagination and reminded me that life was not just about work, but also about wonder and reflection. Our town revolved around shared experiences. Sundays were reserved for church, a simple wooden building where the townspeople gathered not just for worship, but for news, celebration, and fellowship. Church picnics, community fairs, and seasonal celebrations marked the rhythm of our year. These gatherings taught me the value of tradition, of participating in something greater than oneself, and of the bonds that hold a community together. Friendships were central to my growth. My brother and I had companions from the neighborhood, boys with whom I explored, played, and occasionally argued. Together we discovered courage, loyalty, and compromise. Some friendships lasted a season, some a lifetime, but all taught me the importance of trust, shared responsibility, and the comfort of companionship. Reading became my refuge and my inspiration. My mother would occasionally read aloud stories from the few books we had, tales of explorers, heroes, and far-off lands. I would sit, rapt, imagining myself in these adventures. Though I could not yet foresee it, these stories planted the seeds of curiosity and ambition, a desire to understand the broader world beyond Lamar. I also learned the importance of observing and reflecting. Storms, sudden rains, and harsh winters were not merely obstacles, they were lessons. They taught respect for the world's forces, patience for what could not be controlled, and resilience to endure hardship. I learned to pay attention to detail, to anticipate consequences, and to remain calm under pressure, lessons that would serve me well in the years to come. Even as a boy, I began to sense that the world extended far beyond Lamar. Conversations with travelers, letters from distant relatives, and the occasional newspaper sparked my imagination and curiosity. I began to understand that while I was rooted in this small town, life might one day demand that I face challenges far larger than those in my backyard. Yet it was this grounding in Lamar, its simplicity, honesty, and sense of community, that would remain my foundation, no matter where life took me to be. By the time I entered my teenage years, my daily life was a mixture of labor, study, play, and reflection. I had learned to work with my hands, to care for my family, to value honesty and fairness, and to observe the world with curiosity and discernment. I had absorbed lessons about patience, responsibility, and integrity, lessons that, although subtle at the time, were quietly shaping the man I would become. Looking back, it is clear to me that Lamar, with all its simplicity and challenges, was the perfect place to grow up. It was in those quiet streets, in the fields and forests, in our small house filled with love and work, that the foundation of my character was laid. A boy shaped by small victories, quiet hardships, and everyday lessons would, many years later, find himself making decisions that affected millions. But every step of that journey began here, in Lamar, Missouri, in the years of my childhood. And so, my story begins with this town, these people, and the experiences that shaped me. It is a story of ordinary days, small joys, lessons learned through labor and love, and the quiet formation of character that would one day be tested on the national stage. As I moved beyond childhood and into my teenage years, the rhythms of life in Lamar began to shift. The work remained, but I also found myself increasingly aware of the broader world beyond our small town. School continued to shape me, not just through lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but through encounters with ideas, debates with classmates, and the guidance of teachers who took the time to challenge our thinking. I remember one teacher in particular, Mr. Mitchell, who had a sharp eye for curiosity and integrity. He encouraged me to think critically, to question assumptions, and to express myself clearly. Under his influence, I learned that education was not merely a tool for earning a living, but a way to understand and engage with the world. Outside the classroom, responsibilities at home and on the farm continued to occupy much of my time. I became adept at managing multiple tasks, balancing chores, helping my parents, and sometimes assisting neighbors who needed a hand. These years instilled in me a deep sense of duty, a realization that my actions affected not only myself, but those around me. Friendships grew more complex and meaningful during these years. I had companions who shared my curiosity, my love of the outdoors, and my sense of adventure. Together we explored, debated, and sometimes tested the limits of our courage. These friendships taught me loyalty, compromise, and the value of standing by those you care about, lessons that would later inform both personal and professional relationships. That I also began to take notice of the world beyond Lamar. Newspapers became a window into events at the state, national, and international levels. I followed political debates, economic developments, and social issues with growing interest. These glimpses into the wider world sparked a sense of responsibility and a desire to contribute, planting the seeds for my later political life. By late adolescence, I found myself drawn to leadership roles, small though they might be. Whether it was organizing chores among my siblings and cousins, coordinating work with neighbors, or stepping in to mediate disagreements, I discovered a quiet confidence in guiding others. I was learning that leadership was not about commanding attention or asserting authority, but about listening, understanding, and taking responsibility for outcomes. Work, study, and community involvement gradually prepared me for early adulthood. I took on more demanding tasks, sometimes working long hours to support the household, and sometimes dedicating myself to study and reflection. These years were a crucible, forging resilience, patience, and a commitment to doing what was right, even when it was difficult. Romantic interests and early social interactions also began to shape my character. I learned about empathy, understanding, and the importance of mutual respect in relationships. These lessons were subtle, often interwoven with everyday experiences, yet they provided the foundation for the personal relationships that would be significant throughout my life. By the time I reached my late teens and early 20s, I had a clearer sense of who I was and what I valued. Hard work, honesty, responsibility, and respect for others were not just lessons. They were principles I lived by. I felt a growing awareness of my place in the wider world and a desire to contribute meaningfully to society. The lessons of Lamar, of family, of school, and of community had prepared me for the challenges ahead, equipping me with the skills, judgment, and values that would carry me forward. These formative years were not without their challenges. Economic pressures, moments of doubt, and the occasional failure tested my resolve. Yet each challenge provided a lesson, each mistake a chance to learn, and each success a confirmation that perseverance and integrity were essential. Through these experiences, I began to understand that life's path is rarely smooth, but the way we navigate it defines the kind of people we become. Looking back, adolescence and early adulthood in Lamar were a time of profound growth. They shaped my understanding of work, education, relationships, and responsibility. They fostered curiosity, resilience, and leadership. And perhaps most importantly, they taught me that the values formed in the quiet, everyday moments of youth would remain a guiding force throughout the most turbulent and demanding times of my life. As I entered adulthood, the rhythm of life in Lamar remained familiar, yet it was no longer enough to confine my ambitions or my curiosity. The world beyond our small town seemed larger with each passing year, and I felt a growing need to understand it, to find my place in it, and to contribute in ways that mattered. My teenage years had taught me the importance of responsibility, diligence, and observation, but adulthood brought new challenges, complex decisions, deeper relationships, and the first real taste of the burdens that life can impose. That my earliest work experiences were humbling but invaluable. I labored alongside men who had spent their lives mastering their trades: farmers, clerks, and craftsmen. They taught me that skill alone is not enough. Patience, integrity, and reliability matter as much as knowledge. Some days were exhausting. The sun beating down in summer, the bitter cold in winter, the strain of tasks that demanded both strength and careful thought. But through each challenge, I began to understand the subtle ways in which our actions affect others, and how respect is earned not through words, but through consistent effort and honesty. In the evenings, after the work was done, I often reflected on the lessons of the day. Sometimes I would sit quietly by the fireplace, thinking about mistakes I had made or successes I had achieved. I learned early that reflection is as important as action. A man who rushes without considering consequences is doomed to repeat errors. I began to see that leadership is not merely a public display of authority. It is cultivated quietly, in small choices, in patience, and in the courage to act rightly even when it is difficult. And why personal life began to take shape during these years. I met people whose presence taught me the importance of companionship, understanding, and loyalty. Friendships deepened, and I began to experience the first stirrings of romantic attachment. Courtship, conversation, and the careful balancing of expectations taught me patience and empathy. I realized that the principles I had learned in my family, honesty, fairness, respect, were equally critical in relationships. Marriage, I would learn later, is not merely a union of two people. It is a shared journey that tests one's character, endurance, and capacity for love and compromise. Alongside personal growth, my awareness of society expanded. I attended town meetings, listened to debates in local halls, and followed the news of the state and nation with keen interest. I began to see patterns in human behavior, the push and pull of political forces, and the importance of civic engagement. It became clear to me that leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege, and that those who wish to serve their communities must first understand and respect the people they serve. Every small interaction, whether helping a neighbor, resolving a dispute, or voicing a concern at a town meeting, felt like a stepping stone toward understanding the broader obligations of citizenship. That I also began to take on greater responsibility at home. My parents relied on me more and more, both in practical matters and in moral support. I learned to manage tasks, guide younger relatives, and occasionally act as a mediator within the family. These experiences reinforced my understanding that adulthood requires both competence and character. One must act not only for oneself, but for the benefit of others, balancing ambition with humility and principle. Of course, adulthood was not without its challenges. I made mistakes, misjudged situations, underestimated risks, or acted impulsively. Each error was a lesson, a mirror reflecting areas where I could improve. Sometimes I felt the sting of embarrassment or regret, but gradually I understood that maturity comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from learning from them and continuing onward with renewed determination. Patience, empathy, and careful judgment became tools I carried forward, as essential as any skill or knowledge. Community life remained central to my development. I volunteered in local organizations, assisted neighbors with urgent needs, and participated in civic activities. These efforts were not grand or publicized, but they taught me the quiet power of service. I learned that change does not always come from grand gestures. Often it arises from steady, thoughtful action, repeated over time. Each success, each small act of fairness or courage, reinforced the values instilled in me by my family and teachers: diligence, honesty, empathy, and responsibility. During this time, I also began to think seriously about my future. What kind of life did I want to lead? How could I contribute meaningfully to society? These questions did not have immediate answers, but the process of reflection guided my decisions. I realized that ambition without principle is hollow, that progress without morality is fragile, and that true leadership requires service, patience, and integrity. Socially, I encountered the richness and complexity of human relationships. I experienced companionship, conflict, reconciliation, and the quiet satisfaction of mutual understanding. Every friendship, every relationship taught me something new about trust, loyalty, and the nuances of human behavior. I learned to listen carefully, to recognize when words alone are insufficient, and to act with both courage and compassion. By the end of these early adult years, I felt a deepening sense of purpose. I was committed to my family, increasingly aware of my community, and attentive to the responsibilities that might one day extend to the wider world. I understood that life's greatest challenges and its most rewarding achievements demand preparation, reflection, and unwavering dedication to principle. The foundations laid in Lamar, the lessons learned through labor, study, and relationships, and the small acts of service and responsibility all coalesced, preparing me for the larger stage of public life that awaited. Looking back, these years were a crucible of growth. They shaped my understanding of work, duty, and service. They taught me patience, resilience, and moral courage. Most importantly, they revealed that character is built quietly, steadily, through the choices we make each day, long before we face the public eye. As I moved forward into the next chapter of life, I carried with me the knowledge that integrity, empathy, and diligence would guide every decision I made and every challenge I encountered. As I moved further into adulthood, I became increasingly aware that life was about more than personal labor or family responsibility. Beyond the fields of Lamar, beyond the walls of my home, there existed a larger world, a world shaped by laws, decisions, and the actions of those entrusted with public responsibility. It was during these years that my curiosity about politics and public service first took root, that I began to follow town meetings with keen interest, listening to neighbors debate issues, hearing their concerns, and observing the ways in which local decisions affected daily life. Newspapers became a window to state and national affairs, and for the first time, I realized that the events happening miles away could ripple back to impact our small community. I found myself asking questions. How are decisions made? Who decides what is fair? How can ordinary citizens play a meaningful role in shaping their communities? My earliest direct involvement in public affairs was modest, almost invisible in the grand scheme, yet profoundly formative. I volunteered for community tasks, helping neighbors in urgent need, assisting with local fundraising, and participating in small civic projects. I discovered quickly that even the simplest acts of service could make a tangible difference. Whether it was helping organize a town event or assisting a struggling family, I learned the weight and responsibility that come with public engagement. It was also during this time that I first began to test my own capacity for leadership. I tried organizing small groups of young men to assist in farm work, coordinated community efforts, and occasionally mediated disputes among neighbors or relatives. Though these experiences were modest, they taught me essential lessons. Leadership is not merely about giving orders, but about listening carefully, understanding needs, and accepting responsibility for outcomes. Every success and every misstep helped me see that guiding others requires patience, humility, and steadfastness. Education continued to play a critical role in shaping my perspective. I read extensively political theory, history, and the laws of different states, and I paid attention to debates about governance and civic duty. Each text, each article, each lecture I encountered added to my understanding of how society functions and the role individuals can play in guiding it. While I could not yet influence the nation, I felt that I was preparing myself, mentally and morally, for a life of service. At the same time, my professional life began to take shape in small but meaningful ways. I undertook clerical work, bookkeeping, and other positions that demanded attention to detail, patience, and reliability. These tasks exposed me to different people, ideas, and perspectives. I learned to communicate effectively, negotiate disagreements, and manage responsibilities, skills that would later prove invaluable in the political arena. Family life remained the cornerstone of my world. My responsibilities as a husband, a father, and a son grounded me, reminding me that public service could never be fully separated from personal integrity. Every gathering, every shared meal, and every trial faced together strengthened my understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and patience. These qualities, cultivated quietly in the home, became the bedrock for facing challenges beyond its walls. During this period, I began to crystallize a personal philosophy that honesty, diligence, fairness, and responsibility are not merely personal virtues. They are prerequisites for meaningful service to others. Each small action, every choice to act justly or to help someone in need, reinforced these principles. I realized that true service is not motivated by recognition, but by the tangible difference one can make in the lives of others. These years marked the very beginning of my political journey, not with grand campaigns or dramatic speeches, but through careful observation, humble participation, and the steady practice of responsibility. They planted the seeds for a life dedicated to public service, a life in which every decision, every act of leadership would be measured against the standard of integrity and the desire to serve the greater good. Looking back, I see this period as one of quiet awakening. The lessons I learned about leadership, duty, fairness, and service would remain with me for the rest of my life. They reminded me that meaningful action often begins in small, seemingly ordinary moments, and that character, once cultivated, becomes the foundation upon which all public service must rest. Stepping into formal politics was a moment of both excitement and apprehension. After years of observing civic life in Lamar, participating in small community efforts, and reflecting on the responsibilities of citizenship, I realized that if I truly wished to serve, I needed to take a more active role. When a modest county office became available, I seized the opportunity, not for ambition or recognition, but for the chance to make a tangible difference. Walking into the office for the first time, I remember being struck by the weight of its responsibilities. The walls were lined with ledgers, files, and records, each containing details that could affect the lives of people I knew personally. These were not abstract documents. They represented livelihoods, disputes, and essential services. I quickly understood that even the smallest action, the tiniest oversight, could have real consequences for families, neighbors, and the community at large. The work itself was unglamorous. I maintained records, assisted with administrative duties, and ensured that processes ran smoothly. Yet these seemingly simple tasks carried profound lessons. I learned that diligence, accuracy, and honesty were not optional. They were the foundation of trust. A misplaced file or a delayed response could disrupt lives, and seeing that firsthand impressed upon me the human dimension of public service. I also began to recognize the importance of patience and careful judgment, qualities that would become indispensable in the years ahead. The first campaign I became involved in was in education and politics as much as it was in public service. I attended local gatherings, met with voters, and listened intently to their concerns. Every conversation, every handshake, every shared story helped me understand the hopes and anxieties of the people I sought to represent. I realized quickly that politics is not about grand speeches or clever slogans. It is about listening, understanding, and earning trust. The lessons of empathy, respect, and sincerity proved far more valuable than any strategy or rhetoric. Skepticism was inevitable. Many questioned my youth and lack of experience. Some doubted whether I could manage the responsibilities of office or serve the public effectively. I faced criticism openly, learned to accept it without resentment, and used it as a mirror to examine my own conduct. Over time, consistent effort, honesty, and responsiveness earned me respect, and I began to see how perseverance and integrity can transform doubt into confidence. Family remained my anchor. My wife and children bore the sacrifices that came with my new responsibilities, and their unwavering support strengthened my resolve. I recognized that public service is never isolated. It depends on the stability and encouragement of loved ones. Balancing the demands of office with the needs of family was a lesson in organization, prioritization, and commitment, skills that would continue to serve me throughout my political career. As I grew more comfortable in the office, I began to notice patterns in governance. I saw how decisions were made, how resources were allocated, and how conflicts were resolved. I understood that the seemingly mundane aspects of bureaucracy, the ledgers, the procedures, the daily management, were the very mechanisms through which justice and fairness were delivered. I realized that small offices, often overlooked by the public, were the backbone of democracy, and that ethical conduct at every level is essential for the system to function effectively. Networking and coalition building became critical skills. I learned that leadership is not solitary. It requires collaboration, compromise, and understanding differing perspectives. Working with colleagues, negotiating with those holding opposing views, and building trust within the community taught me that effective governance demands both principle and pragmatism. The lessons I absorbed during these early experiences would later guide me when decisions became weightier, stakes higher, and consequences broader. These early political roles also taught me humility. I learned that even small victories require effort, and setbacks are inevitable. Not every idea was accepted, not every initiative succeeded, and not every person agreed with me. But I discovered that persistence, combined with ethical conduct, earns respect and lays the foundation for future opportunities. I also learned the importance of timing, strategy, and patience, understanding when to act, when to listen, and when to wait. Every interaction with constituents reinforced my understanding of service. I learned to approach people with genuine concern, to listen without judgment, and to act with fairness and integrity. These experiences nurtured empathy and deepened my appreciation for the interconnectedness of community life. I came to realize that leadership is measured not by recognition or applause, but by the meaningful difference one can make in the lives of others. By the end of my first years in office, I felt a quiet transformation within myself. I was no longer just an observer of civic life. I had become a participant, responsible not only for my actions, but for their impact on others. I had learned that service is built incrementally, through diligence, patience, honesty, and respect. Each day, each task, each conversation contributed to my understanding of what it truly means to lead and to serve. Looking back, these early political experiences were far more than a stepping stone. They were a crucible in which I honed the principles that would guide me throughout my career: integrity, empathy, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to do what is right. The lessons learned in modest offices, in the quiet moments of observation and interaction, would later sustain me through the immense pressures and responsibilities of higher office. After gaining experience in my first official role, I realized that serving the community was more than completing tasks. It was about earning trust, demonstrating competence, and showing that one could act with integrity even under scrutiny. The lessons learned in those early years guided me as I decided to pursue higher office. I was no longer content with small administrative duties. I wanted to have a broader impact, to participate more fully in shaping policy and serving the people I cared about. The next opportunity came in the form of a position in county-level leadership. Unlike my first office, this role demanded engagement with a wider constituency, more complex decision-making, and a public presence that required careful attention to both principles and perception. I knew that stepping into this position meant more responsibility, more criticism, and more accountability. But I also knew that it offered the chance to serve meaningfully, to affect lives directly, and to test my abilities as a public servant. Campaigning for this office was an education in both human nature and political strategy. I spent long days walking through neighborhoods, meeting voters, shaking hands, and listening to concerns. I made notes of the issues that mattered most: roads in disrepair, schools that needed attention, local businesses struggling to survive, families facing hardship. These conversations were more than campaign material. They were lessons in empathy, patience, and observation. I learned to listen without judgment, to value each voice equally, and to understand the diverse needs of a community. Criticism and opposition were unavoidable. Some questioned my youth, some doubted my experience, and others sought to test my resolve. I met skepticism with humility and persistence. Each challenge became a chance to demonstrate consistency, fairness, and dedication. I quickly realized that resilience is one of the most important qualities a public servant can possess. Leadership is not about avoiding criticism. It is about responding to it thoughtfully, maintaining principles, and continuing to act for the greater good. Family continued to be my anchor throughout the campaign. My wife offered unwavering support, managing the household and providing counsel when I faced difficult decisions. Our children witnessed the demands of public life, and their encouragement reminded me daily of the importance of integrity, not only in public, but also in private. Balancing the needs of my family with the obligations of a higher office became an exercise in discipline, time management, and moral accountability. Winning this election was both exhilarating and humbling. The victory was not mine alone. It belonged to the community that had placed its trust in me. I understood immediately that trust is fragile and earned through consistent action. Every decision I made, every policy I advocated, and every interaction with constituents would be measured against the promise of that trust. Early successes and missteps alike shaped my approach to governance, teaching me that transparency, diligence, and empathy are the cornerstones of enduring public respect. In office, I encountered a new range of responsibilities. Budgetary decisions, community planning, and regulatory oversight required careful study and informed judgment. I had to balance competing interests, negotiate compromises, and sometimes make difficult choices that pleased some while disappointing others. These experiences reinforced the lesson that leadership is as much about managing complexity as it is about vision. It requires patience, flexibility, and an unwavering commitment to ethical principles. I also learned the importance of coalition building and collaboration. No office, no matter how senior, operates in isolation. Working with colleagues, understanding different perspectives, and finding common ground became daily exercises. Each successful negotiation, each constructive debate, taught me that leadership is not solitary heroism. It is collective effort guided by integrity and purpose. By the end of these years, my political reputation began to solidify. People recognized me not merely for holding office, but for the manner in which I conducted myself, fairly, honestly, and with attention to the needs of the community. Small achievements, such as improving local infrastructure or resolving disputes fairly, built credibility that would serve me in future campaigns. More importantly, these experiences deepened my understanding of public service. It is not about personal gain or recognition, but about making decisions that improve lives, build trust, and strengthen the social fabric. Reflecting on this period, I see it as the crucible in which my public identity was formed. The lessons I learned about leadership, patience, empathy, and moral courage were not theoretical. They were lived, tested, and proven through action. Each election, each policy decision, each interaction with constituents reinforced the principles I had carried from my youth and early adulthood: integrity, responsibility, diligence, and a commitment to serve others above self. These years laid the groundwork for everything that would come later. They taught me that political success is built incrementally through consistent effort, ethical behavior, and genuine care for those one serves. And they reminded me that the foundation of public trust is not popularity, but credibility, earned, maintained, and never taken for granted. As I looked ahead to the next chapters of my political journey, I carried with me the knowledge that leadership is both privilege and responsibility, and that every action, however small, shapes the legacy one leaves behind. As I reflected on my journey through local and state politics, I realized that each step had been preparing me for something greater, a role that demanded not just experience, but vision, courage, and an unyielding commitment to serve the American people. My early offices had taught me the mechanics of government, the importance of listening, and the value of integrity. Yet I now understood that the stakes at the national level would be immeasurably higher, and the consequences of action, or inaction, far more significant. The opportunity came when I was asked to consider a role on the national political stage. Unlike my previous positions, this was not merely about administering local affairs or representing a county. It involved shaping policies that affected millions, navigating complex political landscapes, and facing scrutiny from constituents, colleagues, and the press alike. I knew that stepping into such a role would test every lesson I had learned: patience, judgment, diligence, and above all, moral courage. Campaigning at this level demanded a different approach. I traveled across states, attending rallies, speaking with citizens from every walk of life, and addressing the pressing issues of the day. Economic recovery, social inequality, and the looming threats abroad were subjects I needed to understand intimately, not only through reports and newspapers, but by engaging directly with the people whose lives were most affected. Listening became more than a habit. It became a vital tool for understanding the complex needs of a diverse nation. That I recall one particularly memorable trip through rural communities that had been hard hit by economic hardship. Families shared their struggles openly, describing how their livelihoods had been disrupted and how uncertainty weighed on their daily lives. These conversations were humbling. They reminded me that leadership is not about accolades or titles, but about addressing real human problems with practical, compassionate solutions. Each story, each handshake, reinforced my sense of responsibility to act decisively, yet thoughtfully, in service of the public good. Skepticism and political opposition were constant companions. Some questioned whether I had the experience, others whether I could handle the pressures of national politics. I met these challenges with humility, recognizing that public trust is fragile and must be earned through consistent action. I relied on the lessons of my earlier career: respond thoughtfully, act with integrity, and prioritize the needs of the people over personal ambition. Resilience, I discovered, is as critical as competence in public life. Family support continued to be indispensable. My wife's wisdom, patience, and encouragement allowed me to focus on the demands of a national campaign while remaining grounded in the values that had guided me since my youth. The sacrifices and adjustments made by my family were a constant reminder that public service is inseparable from personal responsibility, and that the home remains the foundation from which all ethical action flows. Entering the national political stage also required building broader coalitions and navigating complex party dynamics. I learned to work with colleagues from different regions, reconcile competing interests, and maintain principle while finding compromise. I came to understand that leadership at this level is not about dominance, but about dialogue, strategy, and steady judgment. Decisions were rarely simple. They involved balancing ideals with practicality, ethics with the pressures of politics. Through these experiences, my political reputation began to solidify on a larger scale. People recognized me not merely for my office, but for the manner in which I conducted myself, fairly, honestly, and with consistent concern for the needs of the nation. Every public appearance, every policy discussion, and every interaction with constituents reinforced the lessons I had carried from my earliest experiences in Lamar: integrity, diligence, empathy, and service above self. By the end of this period, I felt a quiet but profound transformation. I was no longer simply a participant in politics. I was emerging as a national figure with responsibilities far beyond my hometown. The lessons learned from local governance, attention to detail, patience, listening, ethical judgment, remained central, but I now applied them on a scale that could shape the future of an entire nation. Looking back, these years prepared me for the most significant challenges and opportunities of my life. They taught me that leadership is not measured by position alone, but by the consistency of action, the courage to uphold principles, and the capacity to understand and serve the needs of the people. As I stepped onto the national stage, I carried with me the knowledge that every decision, no matter how large or small, would reverberate far beyond my immediate sphere, and that true service demands integrity, empathy, and steadfast commitment at every turn. As I gained experience in local politics, I began to realize that meaningful service sometimes requires stepping beyond the familiar boundaries of one's community. The people I had served in Lamar trusted me, but I felt a growing responsibility to take that experience further, to contribute on a broader stage. My ambition was not for recognition. It was born of a desire to make a difference in the lives of more people, to ensure that honesty, diligence, and fairness could extend beyond the town and county I had known. The opportunity arose when positions at the state level became accessible. Unlike my previous offices, state politics demanded a deeper understanding of policy, law, and governance, as well as the ability to communicate effectively with diverse groups of constituents. Campaigning at this level was more complex, more demanding, and often grueling. I traveled extensively, visiting towns and counties, attending public gatherings, and speaking with citizens from all walks of life. Every interaction reinforced my belief that listening is the cornerstone of leadership. That I remember one particular town I visited, a community struggling with flooding and poor infrastructure. The people there shared stories of hardship, frustration, and resilience. I listened patiently, asking questions, taking notes, and assuring them that their voices mattered. These experiences were humbling. They reminded me that public office is not about the prestige of a title, but about solving real problems and improving lives. It was also a period of rapid learning, as I began to navigate the complexities of state-level administration and the differing priorities of various regions. Critics and political opponents were ever present. Some questioned whether I had the experience to serve at a higher level, while others doubted my ability to manage broader responsibilities. Facing opposition became a test of patience, judgment, and moral courage. I learned that leadership requires the ability to stand firm on principle while remaining flexible in approach, a delicate balance that must be maintained at every turn. Family remained my guiding light. My wife's support was invaluable, managing both our home and offering wise counsel. Our children became familiar with the rhythms and sacrifices of political life, and their encouragement bolstered my determination. I understood early that public service is inseparable from personal integrity. The values cultivated at home, honesty, loyalty, and empathy, must guide every decision in the public sphere. Serving at the state level also expanded my understanding of coalition building and collaboration. I worked alongside colleagues from diverse political, social, and economic backgrounds, negotiating compromises and finding common ground. Each legislative session taught me the art of dialogue, the necessity of patience, and the importance of aligning policy with principle. Leadership, I discovered, is often quiet, incremental, and the result of careful, sustained effort rather than dramatic gestures. The transition to federal politics marked another critical turning point. Representing the people at the national level demanded a broader vision, a grasp of complex policy issues, and the ability to communicate effectively on a larger stage. I learned to navigate committees, debates, and national concerns while staying grounded in the values that had guided me since my youth. Integrity, diligence, empathy, and service remained my compass. Every decision, whether about budgets, legislation, or constituent concerns, carried weighty consequences and required careful consideration. During this period, I also encountered the true challenges of public scrutiny. Every action, every word, and every vote was observed and analyzed. Mistakes were magnified, successes often underappreciated. I learned to remain steadfast, to rely on careful judgment, and to seek counsel when necessary. Public service, I understood, demands resilience and the capacity to act for the greater good, even under pressure or criticism. Despite the pressures, these years solidified my political reputation. People began to recognize me for my commitment to fairness, transparency, and practical solutions. Trust, once earned, was a powerful asset, and I understood that it must be maintained through consistent ethical conduct. My early experiences in local and state politics had prepared me for the responsibilities of federal office, teaching me lessons about governance, leadership, and the importance of remaining true to one's principles. Looking back, this period was transformative. It marked the shift from local service to state and federal responsibility, from modest beginnings to a broader platform. The principles I carried with me, integrity, diligence, empathy, and unwavering commitment to service, remain my guide. Every step, from humble offices in Lamar to the halls of national government, reinforced a fundamental truth. Leadership is a privilege and a responsibility, earned through action, sustained by principle, and measured by the positive impact it leaves on the lives of others. These years prepared me for the greater challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, laying the foundation for the public life I would lead. They taught me that true leadership is built slowly, through patience, perseverance, and a consistent commitment to serve, not for personal glory, but for the people and the principles one represents. By the time I had settled into the rhythm of the presidency, the magnitude of the responsibilities I carried became ever clearer. Leadership is never static. It demands constant attention, adaptability, and the willingness to confront issues that can shape not only a nation but the course of history itself. I found myself navigating a world still recovering from global conflict, while simultaneously addressing domestic issues that demanded vision, courage, and practical solutions. One of the most pressing challenges was the transition from war to peace. Millions of servicemen and women were returning home, seeking employment, housing, and stability. I felt the urgency of ensuring that their sacrifices were met with tangible support. Policies such as the GI Bill were critical in providing education, training, and financial assistance. I spent countless hours consulting with advisors, listening to veterans, and reviewing legislation, determined to ensure that these programs met real needs and offered genuine opportunity. The economy required careful management as well. Wartime production had surged, but the shift to a peacetime economy posed risks of unemployment, inflation, and social unrest. I engaged directly with economic advisors, business leaders, and labor representatives, seeking solutions that balanced growth, fairness, and stability. It was a delicate task, requiring both technical understanding and empathy for those whose livelihoods hung in the balance. Internationally, the landscape had become increasingly complex. The post-war order demanded vigilance, diplomacy, and, at times, decisive action. The early signs of ideological tension between emerging superpowers required careful attention. I spent long hours studying reports, meeting with foreign dignitaries, and evaluating options. I understood that decisions made in the White House could have consequences far beyond our borders, affecting peace, stability, and the lives of millions worldwide. One particularly challenging episode involved negotiations with allies and adversaries over the establishment of a lasting international framework for peace. I recognized that effective leadership required both firmness and diplomacy, resolving conflicts without unnecessary confrontation, yet standing resolutely on matters of principle. I drew upon every lesson from my years in local, state, and national politics. Listen carefully, weigh the facts, consider multiple perspectives, and act decisively when required. Domestically, social and political pressures continued to mount. Issues of civil rights, labor relations, and public welfare demanded attention and action. I sought to balance competing interests, promote justice, and maintain the trust of the American people. Every policy, every executive decision, was approached with a mindset of fairness and a determination to serve the broader good. Leadership, I learned, is as much about ethical consistency as it is about tactical execution. These midterm years were also a test of endurance. The presidency is relentless. Long days, complex problems, and constant scrutiny are part of the office. I relied heavily on the support of my family, my advisors, and my inner sense of purpose. The values instilled in me since my youth, integrity, diligence, empathy, and service above self, served as both compass and anchor. In moments of doubt or fatigue, these principles guided my decisions and reinforced my commitment to the people I served. Perhaps most importantly, I came to understand the interplay between vision and pragmatism. Ideals alone are insufficient to govern. They must be translated into practical, actionable policies. Each decision, from domestic programs to international diplomacy, required a careful balance between aspiration and feasibility, principle and compromise. I learned to measure success not by rhetoric or popularity, but by tangible outcomes and the improvement of people's lives. Reflecting on these mid-presidency years, I recognize them as a period of growth, challenge, and reaffirmation of the values that had carried me from Lamar to the White House. Every decision tested my judgment, every crisis demanded resilience, and every victory reinforced the importance of integrity, empathy, and steadfast commitment. Leadership, I realized, is a continuous process of learning, acting, and adjusting, guided always by the principle that service to the people is the highest duty of any office. These experiences prepared me for the later, even more consequential chapters of my presidency. They reinforced the lessons that had shaped my life. That true leadership requires courage in the face of uncertainty, diligence in the execution of duty, empathy for the human consequences of every action, and unwavering adherence to principle. As I looked toward the future, I carried with me the understanding that every decision, every choice, every policy, every speech contributes to the legacy of service that defines a presidency. The moment I was offered the chance to be considered for the vice presidency was both exhilarating and sobering. I understood immediately that the role was not simply ceremonial. It came with immense responsibility and the possibility, however remote it might have seemed at the time, of being called upon to lead the nation. I reflected on my entire journey, the lessons learned in Lamar, the years of local and state service, the challenges faced and overcome, and the values that had guided me since my youth. I knew that I would need every ounce of experience, judgment, and integrity to fulfill such a role. Campaigning for the vice presidency demanded a different level of engagement. It was no longer enough to connect with local constituents or navigate state politics. Now I had to address the concerns of the entire nation. I traveled extensively, often speaking to audiences larger than I had ever imagined, discussing pressing national issues, economic recovery, the post-war global landscape, and domestic reform. Each speech, each appearance, was an opportunity to convey not just policies, but the principles by which I lived: honesty, fairness, and service above self. The political climate at the time was intense. Allies and opponents alike scrutinized every word, every gesture. I quickly learned that public perception could be as influential as policy itself, and that trust, once earned, could be fragile if not consistently reinforced. I focused on maintaining authenticity, speaking plainly and directly, and demonstrating that I approached every decision with careful thought and genuine concern for the people I sought to serve. Behind the public appearances, the work was often grueling and unglamorous. I pored over briefings, policy documents, and correspondence, learning to navigate the complexities of federal governance while maintaining a connection to the experiences and struggles of everyday Americans. I met with advisors, studied economic reports, and debated legislative proposals, understanding that preparation and informed judgment were crucial to effective leadership. Family continued to be my anchor during this demanding period. My wife's support, guidance, and patience made it possible for me to endure the relentless pace of national politics. She reminded me of the values that grounded me: integrity, empathy, and commitment to service, especially during moments of doubt or pressure. I realized, more than ever, that public life is inseparable from personal life, and that the lessons of home and family shape the choices one makes in the highest offices. As the campaign progressed, I also became acutely aware of the unpredictable nature of politics. Opportunities and challenges arose suddenly, requiring adaptability, rapid decision-making, and steady nerves. I learned to trust my instincts, but also to rely on careful analysis and the counsel of experienced advisors. Each day was a test of judgment, character, and endurance. When I finally assumed the office of vice president, I understood the symbolic weight of the position, as well as its practical limitations. Much of the role was advisory, supporting the president and representing the administration at official functions. Yet beneath the ceremonial duties lay the ever-present reality that circumstances could change at any moment, thrusting me into unprecedented responsibility. I approached each day with seriousness, conscious that preparation, attention to detail, and moral courage were essential for whatever challenges might arise. During this time, the world faced extraordinary challenges. The aftermath of global conflict, the transition to peacetime, and the pressures of international diplomacy demanded steady leadership at every level. I learned quickly that leadership is measured not only by immediate actions, but by readiness, being able to respond decisively when history calls. Every meeting, every briefing, every conversation with the president or cabinet officials reinforced the gravity of public service and the necessity of competence, humility, and foresight. The eventual call to assume the presidency came suddenly, as history sometimes dictates. I reflected on every step of my journey: the early years in Lamar, the initial civic duties, the campaigns, the state and federal service, and my time as vice president. Each experience had prepared me, however incrementally, for the moment when responsibility for the nation would fall squarely on my shoulders. I realized that leadership is not about ambition or timing. It is about preparation, character, and an unwavering commitment to serve when the need arises. Looking back on this period, I understand that becoming vice president and moving toward the presidency was not merely a series of events. It was the culmination of decades of learning, listening, and growing. It was a test of resilience, judgment, and moral courage, and a reminder that true service is measured by readiness to act for the greater good, regardless of personal comfort or recognition. The lessons I carried into the highest office were the same principles that had guided me from the very beginning: integrity, empathy, diligence, and an unwavering commitment to the people I was privileged to serve. The day I assumed the presidency remains etched vividly in my memory, a day marked by gravity, uncertainty, and the profound awareness of the responsibilities now entrusted to me. I had long prepared myself through years of local, state, and national service, but no preparation could entirely convey the weight of suddenly becoming the leader of a nation emerging from war. I remember feeling the simultaneous weight of history and the trust of millions of Americans. Almost immediately, the magnitude of the challenges became apparent. The war in Europe had ended, but the world remained fragile. The Pacific War was still raging, and the questions of reconstruction, demobilization, and diplomacy required urgent attention. Every decision carried immense consequences, and I understood that hesitation or error could cost countless lives or shape the future of nations for decades. The first days in office were consumed by briefings, assessments, and consultations. I met with military advisors, cabinet members, and foreign policy experts, striving to understand the scope of the issues before me. Decisions about strategy, resource allocation, and timing had to be made quickly, yet carefully. I recalled the lessons of my early political career: listen attentively, gather facts, consider perspectives, and act with both principle and pragmatism. These principles guided every choice I made during those critical first weeks. One of the earliest and most significant challenges was the management of the war in the Pacific. The use of emerging military technology, the consideration of civilian safety, and the assessment of long-term consequences weighed heavily on my mind. I spent countless hours reviewing intelligence reports, consulting with military leaders, and debating options with my advisors. The gravity of the decisions was humbling. Each option carried ethical, strategic, and human implications that could never be ignored. Domestically, the country faced its own set of urgent issues. Millions of returning veterans required support and reintegration into civilian life. The economy had to transition from wartime production to peacetime needs, and social and political tensions required careful management. I focused on maintaining stability, promoting fairness, and ensuring that the voices of ordinary citizens were heard in every policy decision. Listening, I realized, remained as essential at the national level as it had in Lamar years ago. The suddenness of assuming office also taught me lessons about resilience and decisiveness. There was little time for hesitation or self-doubt. I had to rely on judgment honed through years of public service and trust the counsel of those around me while remaining accountable for the final decisions. Every day demanded energy, focus, and moral courage. Leadership, I learned, is often tested most when circumstances are urgent, stakes are high, and outcomes are uncertain. Throughout these early months, I relied heavily on the support of my family and trusted advisors. Their counsel and encouragement reminded me to remain grounded, to act ethically, and to consider the human impact of every decision. Public life is relentless, but the values cultivated in private life, honesty, patience, empathy, and diligence, provided the compass needed to navigate the pressures of the highest office. As I reflect on these initial challenges, I understand that leadership is a blend of preparation, principle, and responsiveness. There were no guarantees, only the knowledge that every choice mattered, that every action carried consequences, and that the trust placed in me by the American people demanded my full commitment. Each difficult decision, each consultation, each careful judgment reinforced the lessons I had carried from my earliest political experiences: integrity, responsibility, empathy, and service above self. These early days shaped not only my approach to the presidency, but also my understanding of what it truly means to lead a nation. I realized that leadership is not a title, but a continuous exercise of judgment, moral courage, and dedication. It is about serving others, making choices that may not always be popular, and acting with consistency and fairness, even when the path forward is uncertain. Looking back, I see these months as a crucible that tested my preparation, my values, and my resolve. They taught me that true leadership is forged in moments of crisis, guided by principle, and sustained by the unwavering commitment to the people one serves. Every decision, every consultation, and every challenge reinforced the core truth that had guided me since my earliest days in Lamar. Leadership is a privilege, a responsibility, and a service that demands both courage and humility. As my presidency entered its later years, the weight of responsibility never lessened. It only grew heavier. Decisions made during this period would leave lasting impacts on the nation and the world, shaping not only policy but the moral and historical judgment of my administration. I understood that every action, every statement, and every decision mattered profoundly. There was no room for complacency, only constant diligence and careful judgment. One of the most significant challenges involved the post-war international order. The world had emerged from a period of unprecedented conflict, yet peace remained fragile. The establishment of the United Nations, The rebuilding of Europe and the tensions with emerging superpowers demanded constant attention. I worked tirelessly to support diplomatic solutions, negotiate agreements, and provide guidance that balanced American interests with global stability. Each meeting, each briefing, each negotiation reminded me that leadership at the highest level requires both vision and patience. Domestically, I faced pressing issues that tested my convictions and political acumen. Economic recovery, labor disputes, and the integration of returning veterans into society were ongoing concerns. Social tensions, particularly those surrounding civil rights, required careful attention and the courage to act in the interest of justice and equality. I sought to approach every challenge with empathy, balancing the needs of the present with the responsibility to ensure fairness and opportunity for future generations. The decisions regarding national security and foreign policy were among the most difficult. I had to weigh intelligence, military advice, and diplomatic considerations, often with limited information and under intense pressure. Each choice carried consequences for the lives of Americans and the global balance of power. I relied on the lessons learned from years of public service. Listen carefully, deliberate thoroughly, act decisively, and remain accountable for the results. Leadership, I realized, is most tested not in calm periods, but in moments of uncertainty and potential crisis. Throughout these years, family remained my grounding force. Their support, understanding, and counsel were invaluable, reminding me that even in the highest office, decisions affect not just policy, but the lives of those closest to us. The personal sacrifices required by the presidency are immense, and having a steadfast foundation at home allowed me to maintain clarity, resilience, and purpose that I also reflected often on the nature of legacy. A presidency is not measured solely by immediate successes or popular acclaim. It is judged by the enduring effects of decisions on society, the stability of the institutions one leads, and the moral clarity of one's actions. I was determined that, whatever the challenges or criticism, my decisions would be guided by principle, the lessons of experience, and a commitment to the welfare of the people I served. Several key initiatives and decisions defined this period. I worked to strengthen alliances, promote economic stability, and advance social reforms where possible. I confronted challenges with an understanding that progress is rarely linear, that setbacks are inevitable, and that leadership requires both courage and humility. The successes were meaningful, but equally important were the lessons learned from obstacles, disagreements, and the complexity of governance at the national and international level. As I approached the conclusion of my presidency, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, from a young man in Lamar, learning the responsibilities of civic engagement, to the corridors of state and federal government, and ultimately to the White House. Each stage of my life had contributed lessons in empathy, integrity, perseverance, and the importance of service above self. These lessons guided every choice and framed my understanding of what it means to lead effectively and ethically. The legacy I hoped to leave was not one of personal recognition, but of principled leadership and service to the people. I understood that history would judge the decisions I made, and I accepted that responsibility with humility and solemnity. Yet, I took comfort in knowing that throughout every challenge, whether in local office, state service, vice presidency, or the presidency itself, I had strived to act with integrity, diligence, and unwavering commitment to the nation. Looking back, I see my presidency not as a series of isolated events, but as a continuum of service, learning, and leadership. The lessons of early political life, listening, fairness, patience, empathy, and accountability, remained central throughout. Each challenge reinforced the understanding that leadership is a duty to the people, a test of character, and an opportunity to contribute to something greater than oneself. These are the principles I carried with me to the end of my term, and the legacy I hope endures beyond my time in office. Leaving the White House was a moment of profound reflection. After years of intense responsibility, constant scrutiny, and high-stakes decision-making, I stepped away with a mixture of relief, humility, and a deep awareness of the journey that had brought me to that point. I had carried the weight of a nation, faced unprecedented global challenges, and navigated complex domestic issues. Yet, as I looked toward the next chapter of life, I understood that public service does not end with the office. It continues in memory, example, and influence. returning to private life offered both freedom and introspection. I cherished the ability to spend more time with my family, to engage with the simple pleasures of everyday life, and to reconnect with friends and communities I had long missed. These years reminded me that even in the highest office, the grounding of home and personal relationships remains essential to character and perspective. I reveled in conversations with loved ones, enjoying the ordinary yet profound moments that had been scarce during the presidency. Yet, retirement did not mean disengagement. I remained attentive to the world, offering counsel when sought and participating in public discourse with a measured voice. I recognized the unique position of former presidents to influence, advise, and illuminate history through reflection while respecting the authority of the current office. Writing, correspondence, and interviews allowed me to share insights about leadership, ethics, and governance, hoping that my experiences might guide future generations. One of the most rewarding aspects of life after the presidency was witnessing how decisions made during my term continued to influence the nation. The policies I had enacted, the international alliances I had fostered, and the social reforms pursued all carried consequences beyond my tenure. It was gratifying to see stability, growth, and progress in areas that had once been uncertain, and to know that service undertaken with integrity could leave a lasting impact. Historical evaluation, of course, was beyond my control. I came to understand that the judgment of future generations might differ from contemporary reactions, and that public memory is shaped by both outcomes and narratives. I focused not on accolades or criticism, but on the principle that one should act with honesty, diligence, and an unwavering commitment to the common good. True leadership, I realized, is as much about the moral record as it is about tangible achievements. That I also took time to reflect on the personal growth that the presidency had fostered. The experience had tested every dimension of character: resilience, patience, empathy, judgment, and courage. It had taught me that leadership is a lifelong process, not confined to moments of public visibility. The values that guided me from the earliest days in Lamar, integrity, service, responsibility, and care for others, remained as relevant in private life as they had in the Oval Office. Public recognition, awards, and honors arrived over the years, yet I measured satisfaction not by symbols of acknowledgement, but by the knowledge that my decisions were guided by principle and the welfare of the people. I found joy in mentoring, in speaking about governance, and in witnessing young leaders engage with civic life with curiosity and integrity. Sharing experiences and lessons became a form of continued service, a way to ensure that the wisdom gleaned from decades of public life could have enduring influence. That I also spent considerable time reflecting on the human dimension of leadership. Every decision I made had real consequences for families, communities, and nations. Understanding this human impact required humility, empathy, and vigilance. The presidency is often seen as a position of power, but in truth, it is a position of responsibility, an obligation to act with conscience, foresight, and unwavering dedication to those one serves. As I look back on my life, I see a journey defined not by the pursuit of personal gain, but by service, growth, and learning. From my earliest civic duties to the highest office in the nation, the guiding principles were constant: integrity, diligence, empathy, and a commitment to act in the best interest of the public. The legacy I hope to leave is one that reflects these values, demonstrating that leadership is measured not merely by titles or accolades, but by the consistency of moral courage and the impact on the lives of others. Ultimately, life after the presidency provided perspective. It allowed me to appreciate the cumulative lessons of decades of service, to witness the ongoing story of the nation I had been privileged to lead, and to understand that leadership is a continuous commitment that extends beyond the confines of office. I found peace in knowing that I had acted to the best of my ability, guided by principle, and with an unwavering dedication to the people who had entrusted me with their trust and their future. In the end, the true measure of a life in public service is not immediate acclaim or recognition, but the enduring influence of principled action, the integrity of one's decisions, and the positive effects on the lives of others. These are the lessons I hope will endure, and the values I carried from my earliest days to the very last moments of public service.